The house was too cheap, and that should have been the first warning, but when you're desperate, warnings feel like luxuries meant for other people. And so when Daniel and his wife Mira stood on the cracked sidewalk staring up at the two-story rental on Gray Hollow Road, with its peeling white paint, sagging porch steps, and windows that reflected the overcast sky like unblinking eyes, they convinced themselves that the musty smell was just age, that the silence was just peace, and that the landlord's refusal to step inside with them was nothing more than a quirk of an elderly man tired of paperwork, and they signed the lease that same afternoon, unaware that the house had been waiting for them far longer than they had been looking for it. The first night passed quietly, almost deceptively so, but the silence was wrong, not the comforting quiet of a sleeping home, but a heavy, pressing stillness that seemed to push inward from the walls, as if the house itself were holding its breath, listening, and Daniel noticed it most when the refrigerator clicked off and the pipes settled, when the absence of sound felt louder than any noise, and he lay awake staring at the ceiling fan as it rotated with a faint, uneven wobble, wondering why the shadows on the ceiling didn't quite move the way they should. By the third night, the house began revealing itself in small, deniable ways. The soft thud from upstairs when neither of them had gone up, the faint smell of damp earth that crept into the bedroom long after the windows were shut, the way the hallway light flickered only when someone stood beneath it, and Mira laughed it off at first, exhaustion and stress clinging to her voice, but her laughter always ended too quickly, as if something inside her had gone cold mid-breath. The first truly unsettling moment came when Daniel found the spare bedroom door open, though he was certain he had locked it after noticing scratch marks along the inside of the frame, shallow but numerous, like fingernails dragged repeatedly through paint, and when he mentioned it to Mira she stared at him with an expression that hovered between fear and guilt and admitted that she'd heard whispering the night before, low, urgent murmurs leaking through the walls, voices layered atop one another, saying nothing she could clearly understand but speaking with the unmistakable intimacy of something meant only for her. And the way she said it, her eyes unfocused, made Daniel wish she hadn't told him at all. As days passed, the house seemed to learn them, adjusting itself subtly to their habits. The creak in the staircase shifted to follow Daniel's nightly trips to the kitchen, the bathroom mirror fogged even when no hot water had been used, words sometimes appearing faintly in the steam before vanishing as though erased by an unseen hand, and Mira began forgetting things, small at first, where she left her phone, whether she had eaten, but soon more disturbing lapses followed, like standing in the kitchen holding a knife with no memory of picking it up, or waking from sleep with tears soaking the pillow and the overwhelming certainty that someone had been watching her dream from inside her own head. The neighbors offered no comfort, their interactions clipped and evasive, eyes sliding away whenever the house was mentioned, and one woman across the street finally whispered, almost apologetically, "It doesn't like to be talked about," before shutting her door with a finality that echoed like a warning bell. Daniel tried to ground himself in logic, researching the property history late at night while Mira slept restlessly beside him, and what he found was less dramatic than he'd expected but far worse: no reported murders, no fires, no crimes sensational enough to explain the dread clinging to every room, only a long pattern of short-term tenants, people who moved in and left abruptly, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes abandoning furniture, clothing, even pets, and in a few cases, people who simply vanished from the records altogether, as if the house had slowly erased them. The breaking point came when Daniel came home early from work to find Mira standing in the spare bedroom, her back to him, her hands pressed flat against the wall, whispering softly to something he couldn't see, and when he called her name she turned with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and said, "It says we belong here," in a voice that was not quite her own, layered with another tone beneath it, older, heavier, and vibrating with a hunger that made Daniel's stomach twist. He dragged her from the room despite her resistance, ignoring the way the door slammed shut behind them on its own, and that night the house no longer bothered hiding. Footsteps paced the hallway for hours, stopping just outside the bedroom door. The walls groaned like strained muscles, and the whispering grew louder, clearer, forming fragmented sentences about loneliness, about being abandoned, about how it had kept everyone who stayed, one way or another. Daniel packed in a frenzy the next morning, shoving clothes into bags while Mira sat on the bed, eerily calm, telling him they were making a mistake, that the house was only lonely, that it just wanted them to stay, to listen, to remember. And when he grabbed her arm to pull her toward the door, she screamed, not in fear, but in fury, and the sound that came from her throat was echoed instantly from every room in the house. A chorus of screams overlapping until the air itself seemed to vibrate. The front door wouldn't open, the windows wouldn't break, and the walls seemed to bend inward, narrowing the space as though the house were folding itself around them, tightening its grip. And in that suffocating moment Daniel understood the terrible truth, that the house was not haunted by ghosts, not possessed by restless spirits, but alive in the most unnatural way, feeding on presence, on attention, on the slow erosion of memory and identity, keeping pieces of everyone who stayed until they were no longer whole enough to leave. He woke up days later on the front lawn with emergency lights flashing and neighbors gathered at a cautious distance, the house behind him quiet and unchanged. And when he asked where his wife was, the paramedic hesitated before saying there was no sign anyone else had been inside, no belongings, no evidence of a second occupant at all. And even as Daniel screamed her name and tried to crawl back toward the porch, he felt something tug gently at the back of his mind, a familiar whisper urging him to remember her face, her voice, the way she smiled. But the harder he tried to hold on to those memories, the more they slipped away, dissolving like mist, until all that remained was the unbearable certainty that the house on Gray Hollow Road was no longer empty, and that it was already waiting for someone new.